Shopping is hard, right? But there's a better way. Stitch Fix online personal styling makes it easy. I just give my stylist my size, style, and budget preferences. I order boxes when I want and how I want. No subscription required. And she sends just for me pieces. Plus outfit recommendations and styling tips. I keep what I love and send back the rest. It's so easy. Personal styling for everyone. Get started today at stitchfix.com/Spotify. That's stitchfix.com/Spotify.
Amid threats of tariffs on everything from aluminum, steel, cars, and all goods entering the United States, Canadian politicians have been on a charm offensive trying to sway members of the Trump administration. Between the Premier's meeting with White House officials and Canada appointing a fentanyl czar, politicians in the country are hoping to avoid an all-out trade war. I'm Dave Breakenridge, and this is 10-3. National Post politics reporter Catherine Levesque joins me to discuss how our diplomatic efforts have fared so far, what exactly our fentanyl czar is supposed to do, and whether this will resonate with the president or others in his administration. Don't forget you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music. I'd love it if you could leave us a rating, a review, and tell your friends about the show. So, Catherine, when it comes to Donald Trump and tariffs, he's been a bit of a moving target. We were going to get hit with them February 1st, and then he pushed it back, and then it was aluminum and steel, and now he's talking about Canadian-made cars. And we're recording this on Thursday morning, and so, as I say, he's a bit of a moving target. What has tariffs from the U.S. and what doesn't?
Well, I guess the good news is for now, there's nothing as of now. There are no tariffs in place. We do have a bit of a reprieve, as you mentioned, for a couple of weeks. That came after Justin Trudeau not only announced retaliatory tariffs, but also made a deal with Donald Trump at the border. So, but the bad news, I guess, is that we could be looking at massive tariffs on pretty much everything very soon. So we're looking at three important deadlines as we speak. The first one is on March 4th. So that's when President Trump has threatened to impose 25% tariffs on all Canadian goods. It was supposed to happen earlier this month, but we had that 30-day reprieve. So that really brings us to March 4th. The second one is on March 12th. So that would be for steel and aluminum for all countries, including Canada. So we're talking about 25% tariffs across the board for aluminum and steel, which is even higher than the tariffs on those two products that we had in 2018. Not only that, but White House officials this week have said that these tariffs would be stacked on top of the March 4 tariffs. So, we could be in a situation where, there's 25% tariffs on March 4th on steel and aluminum, but where we're looking at 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum, as of March 12th, which would be absolutely devastating for the industry. And the last deadline we're looking at, because yes, there's a third one, is April 1st. That's when Trump trade officials will have concluded their study of what they call economic and trade imbalances. So, President Trump has said we could be looking at further tariffs by then. It's still unclear what these could look like. But really, I think we're looking down the line in just a couple of weeks at a lot of economic pain for Canada, but also our American partners. And that could be coming very soon. And, as you said, he's very unpredictable. So, he had a problems just a few days back with our Canadian banks. Now he has a problem with our cars, and he wants to, decimate our industry basically without realizing that our industry, especially our auto industry, is extremely integrated on both sides of the border. So, a lot of moving targets, but as things stand right now, we're just looking at three deadlines.
Okay. You mentioned aluminum and steel, and obviously there's a big intercountry trade relationship between Canada and the U.S. on a number of issues, but aluminum and steel seem to be pretty big players from Canadian aluminum and steel specifically in the American market. How big a deal is our products in those two sectors?
Oh, it's a huge deal. So we're actually the main source of imports of steel and aluminum into the US. So it mainly comes from Canada. I would say especially aluminum, because right now, the United States imports no less than 80% of its aluminum. And a large part of that comes from Canada, and in particular, Quebec. Why Quebec? Because it has large reserves of hydropower. And frankly, I mean, the United States knows this. I mean, even the U.S. Chamber of Commerce this week admitted that the U.S. cannot produce enough aluminum for its own consumption. I mean, they would be in big trouble if we decided, if there were some tariffs on these products. When we're talking about aluminum, we're talking about major players like Coca-Cola, like Pepsi, but also beer companies like Molson. We're talking about soup companies like Campbell. So I'm sure all these very big industries have a lot of thoughts about these tariffs coming into place because it will hurt consumers in the end. As for steel, I mean, that's also a big problem. That's going to hurt Ontario in particular. There's a lot of steel plants in the Hamilton area. So it's really going to be a huge problem for the manufacturing sector, in particular the auto sector here in Ontario and the US. But also like the defense sector for shipbuilding, things like that. So it's really going to be hurting Canada and the US. Already we're seeing a lot of pushback at the moment, not only from Canadians, but we've seen this week the CEO of Ford coming out very strongly to say that these measures are already causing chaos in the auto sector, and it's going to hurt Americans in the end. So really, this is not good news for either side of the border, but really, Donald Trump is really intent on putting tariffs, and I think he's trying to raise revenue as fast as possible.
Yeah. I know that when the main tariffs on all Canadian goods were first announced, there was a big retaliatory approach taken by the Canadian government threatening matching tariffs or tariffs on a number of U.S. sectors. But in the last couple of weeks, 10 days, it feels like there's been a bit more of an attempt at diplomacy, of having conversations with U.S. officials. And I know Prime Minister Justin Trudeau happened to have a brief meeting with the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance in Europe this week. Do we get a sense that the PM made any headway with the Vice President, or perhaps came out of their brief conversation with a sense that there may be room to maneuver here?
I'm not sure I would go that far. I mean, really, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau described this as a brief encounter. But yes, I mean, both men were in Paris this week for a global summit on artificial intelligence. So, Trudeau, I guess, took the opportunity to get some FaceTime with JD Vance. This is something that all Canadian officials are trying to do on a regular basis. I know a few weeks back, premiers did that, with Donald Trump, with Elon Musk when they had a chance. I'm thinking in particular of Quebec Premier François Legault and Notre Dame in France, tried to talk to them. So anyways, Justin Trudeau and all Canadian officials are trying to do the same thing. And Trudeau told J.D. Vance directly about the impacts that tariffs on steel and aluminum would have in Ohio. Why Ohio? Because Vance was representing that state in the U.S. Senate until recently. So that really touches a lot of his citizens, people he used to represent, not so long ago. And it's not a small number. Like, we're talking about $2.2 billion worth of steel and aluminum every year from Canada going into the manufacturing sector in Ohio. So that's pretty significant. So yes, very brief exchange, but at least the message, it seems, went directly to the vice president. And I think the hope for Justin Trudeau is that Vance relays that message directly to Trump. We'll see if that sways him in any way. But really, even though I think it must have been maybe a frosty exchange, I don't think, J.D. Vance thinks very highly of Justin Trudeau. But still, the message came through. It seems like J.D. Vance at least nodded and acknowledged the information coming to him. And maybe that is something that he's going to keep in mind as, the president is threatening to impose tariffs in the next few weeks.
We'll be right back.
Are you a forward thinker? Then you need an HR and finance platform that thinks like you do. Workday is the AI platform that helps propel your organization, your workforce, and your industry into the future. Workday, moving business forever forward.
Now, the big push this week came from Canada's premiers, and I know they've been trying to take a group approach, and they took that all the way to Washington with a big road trip, 13 provincial and territorial leaders who were in Washington, and they secured a meeting with White House officials. Was this, an attempt to gently sway the administration, or are they trying to really force the U.S. hand here?
I think, frankly, it was a diplomatic effort, first and foremost. Really the idea, and I mean, federal officials have been doing this, premiers have been doing this as well. It was just the first time that all 13 premiers were there at the same time this week. So the idea was to multiply meetings with Republicans, with Democrats, with lawmakers, to make them understand how intertwined our economies are and how tariffs are going to hurt the people they represent, causing higher inflation, causing interest rates to go up, and generally just hurting both economies at a time where President Trump has said that he wants to lower the cost of living in the U.S. So I think really Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew described it best. What the premiers were trying to do this week. He said it was a charm offensive from premiers. So really no one's trying to strong arm anyone or issue ultimatums, he said, but it's really about giving out warm handshakes, reminding how good friends we are, and how nice Canadians are. But really, I mean, it was an effort that was noticed because the premiers had an opportunity, like you said, to bring their message directly to the White House. So they didn't speak to the president per se, but to people close to him, specifically his deputy chief of staff for legislative affairs, but also his director of personnel, who's basically his HR person, I guess. So, it's still people in the White House. It's still, a good access to have. And so they all went there. The premier said they did a lot of listening. They're trying to understand what exactly President Trump wants. And they also, so they were told to take the president at his word. But I think the premiers also really wanted to bring home the point that the fifth, all this talk about the 51st state, that's a non-starter. Trump should just drop that idea. And frankly, it's just making Canadians very, very angry. So, look, I'm not sure, concretely what came out of this conversation. I think it was just a lot of listening exercise, and we'll see if any of that comes directly to President Trump's ears. But certainly, I think it was a little victory on the part of the premiers this week.
Yeah, is that what the premiers were trying to message coming out of these meetings? Is, hey, we were here, we had the ear of people in the administration, we consider it a win. Were they all speaking from the same hymn book, as it were? Did they have kind of a group message coming out of it, or was each premier kind of speaking to their own audience?
I think the premiers coming out of that meeting, they were very tight-lipped. I think they all have their different strategies at the moment, right? Like, they're not talking in the same voice. I mean, look, overall, they have a general message, which is, let's try to make sure these tariffs do not happen. But I think they have a lot of differing views on what to do next. I thought it was interesting to hear Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, but also Quebec Premier François Legault, both suggesting that in order to make sure we're not slapped by all these tariffs and there aren't all these threats, these new threats every week, that Canada should go ahead and open up CUSMA, which is our free trade agreement with the United States and Mexico that Trump renegotiated just a few years ago. So, they're of the view that we should open that up right away to smooth out any trade irritants. But frankly, Legault admitted that not all premiers agree on this. Smith and Legault also calling for an early federal election because they say, we have a lame duck prime minister and we can't have potentially 3 prime ministers renegotiating CUSMA. Trudeau, maybe Mark Carney in a couple of weeks, and Pierre Poilievre after the next federal election. So they're really of the view that we should go into an election sooner rather than later to make sure that we have a prime minister here in Canada who has a strong mandate and can really be credible in the face of the U.S. administration. But I mean, others were a little bit more reserved. I'm thinking of Doug Ford, who, it's not his habit to be very reserved and tight-lipped, but he was really like that this week, and it seems like he didn't want to inflame any tensions. I think he's really concerned and worried about the effect that these tariffs could have, maybe on his reelection, but just on the Ontario economy in general. He said what success looks like is zero tariffs. He wouldn't say how he wants to do that, but he also said that, frankly, he doesn't think that Americans fully understand what is at stake here with the Canada-US relationship. So, yeah, very worried. I think he's trying to multiply conversations and to get his message out, but really it's very, very difficult. And frankly, I don't think this is the relationship with Canada, I don't think is something that is very top of mind these days with the Americans. The U.S. media isn't really talking about this. I think this is really a Canadian issue, but it's really, really hard to punch through at this moment.
Now, amid all this came the appointment of Canada's fentanyl czar, who's supposed to address concerns about the cross-border fentanyl trade that were raised by Donald Trump. What do we know about Kevin Brosseau?
Yeah, I mean, we all discovered him at the same time, right? He actually has a great resume on paper. He recently served as a Deputy National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister. He also served as Assistant Deputy Minister in federal departments, notably the Fisheries and Transport departments. So, he's been around here in Ottawa, but prior to his work in the federal public service, he was actually a Mountie. He served in the RCMP for over 20 years, including as deputy commissioner, and he was also serving as commanding officer in Manitoba. So he was their top cop there. So he really has a wide range of experience. He knows what's happening at the border. I think he understands, what is at stake here in terms of, making sure that everyone works together to prevent what we call the scourge of fentanyl. He is also, he is a public servant. I don't know if that is what President Trump had in mind for a fentanyl czar. I mean, maybe he was expecting a former military officer or something of the sort, some sort of celebrity. But look, I think we have this man. He seems up to the task, and he seems to be already, hitting the ground running.
What is it he's expected to do? I mean, fentanyl's already a controlled substance. We already have laws against drug trafficking. We have a border services agency that deals with the border. We have a national police force. What is Mr. Brosseau expected to do differently?
That's a very good question. I think, look, he says that he is expected to better integrate, all these different forces who are, so that they work better together, whether it is the CBSA at the border, whether it is the RCMP or local police forces, but also to better work with the U.S. administration and, our U.S. partners in combating fentanyl. And look, let's be honest, let's reiterate that Canada is not the problem. I mean, we had 43 pounds of fentanyl coming into the U.S. From Canada last year, but still, I mean, he says that he wants to bring that number to zero, and he wants to make sure that, we really make sure that this is not a problem and that the U.S. administration cannot point our fingers at Canada. So I think, look, this week, his first day on the job, he was at the Thousand Islands border crossing in Ontario, meeting with the RCMP, with border officials. He's already very proactive in what he wants to do. He wants to get out there. I can expect that he will be in Washington pretty soon. He says he hopes to meet with Tom Homan, who is Donald Trump's border czar. So I think he will be pretty present. He will be working in the background, but I think ultimately it's to make sure that everyone works together, that, all these thousands of men and women in this country make sure to really combat drug trafficking. So I think that's, we'll see what kind of results we can expect in the next few weeks and months, but at least we have that appointment. This is something that we promised to the United States, and it's done. This is, something that we can check off our list.
Yeah. Now, as you mentioned off the top, a lot of the deadlines that we're facing are a couple weeks down the line, March 4th, March 12th, April 1st. Do we anticipate anything new from the U.S. administration in the interim? Could Donald Trump announce more tariffs against Canada or other countries? Or is it silly to play a guessing game? Because as we've noted, he can be quite unpredictable.
Yeah, I think, he loves the idea of tariffs. I mean, he seems really determined to slap as many tariffs as possible because his goal ultimately is, like I said, is to raise revenue. Because the United States is deeply in debt. They have a huge deficit. Their economy is not going so well. Their inflation is pretty sticky still. So he needs a lot of money fast. At the same time, I think we've, having, seen his first mandate and, kind of going into his second mandate, we see that a lot. He makes a lot of threats and then people complain. And then he kind of, comes to a deal at the last minute. And certainly, I can tell you that is what happened, the last few times he threatened to slap tariffs on us across the board. I think we'll really have to see, at the last minute what else we can do, right? Because, we already promised some measures at the border. He said the border was a problem. We promised all these measures. We've been acting. I'm not sure what else we can promise and what kind of deal we can come up with. But look, I think the solution to tariffs is going to come from Americans themselves. I think, as I mentioned, Ford CEO, I think, we'll be seeing a lot of business leaders, trying to convince the Trump administration to not go in that direction. I think a lot of Americans, if they see that their cost of living is going up, I think they will be blaming the Trump administration. So really the pressure, yes, is coming from Canadians, but I think the most effective pressure will be coming from Americans. And I think he'll be hearing a lot of them in the next few weeks. And I think we can only brace ourselves because, this is going to be a rocky few couple of weeks and months and years.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't have said it any better myself. It is going to be some rocky weeks and months and maybe 4 years. Catherine, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
On Thursday, Trump announced plans to impose reciprocal tariffs on U.S. trading partners in what he says is an attempt to narrow America's trade deficit. 10-3 is produced by Sean Knox. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Thanks to my guest, Catherine Levesque. More from her at nationalpost.com. I'm Dave Breakenridge. Thanks for listening.